the way brands work with influencers is subject to change. I thought that then, and I think it today. But what I don't think will change is the idea that people with influence will always be important and always be valuable. And so to work with them and to help them create more value is interesting to me.
Hello and welcome to Creator Behind the Influence, a podcast by influence marketing agency Digital Voices. I'm Jennifer Quigley-Jones, Jenny, the CEO of Digital Voices, and I'm joined today by a very special guest because it's kind of behind the influence. I'm here with Dani Lowney, the founder of Sixteenth, one of the UK's leading talent agencies who really promote having good influence. So, do you want to introduce yourself properly?
Thank you so much for having me, Jenny. It's good to see you again. I'm Dani. I started a company called Sixteenth about five and a bit years ago now. And we manage creators here, predominantly in the UK, who as you said, have a good influence in their audience. Creators who leverage like the influence they have over people and want to do something good with that. So that's how we position ourselves from like about 12 months after we started, and that's really kind of been the guiding principle of the company ever since. But yeah, that's us.
It's very exciting. We work together quite a lot, so I'm excited to hear the full backstory. Yeah. So how did you get into even the idea of founding a talent management agency?
Yeah, well, it's funny hearing you ask the question like that, because it was never like, I want to start a talent management agency or anything like that. Really what happened was I had, as a kid, had a couple of different marketing jobs, and whilst I was still at uni, was doing growth marketing at a tech startup. So I stayed there like after I graduated and had a really amazing time doing that. I loved it, and learned so much about kind of being at the early stages of a company in a small team, until one day the company closed down. So it was one of those kind of pre-revenue, well-funded but pre-revenue startups, and so ultimately we could tell that we weren't kind of going to hit the numbers that investors needed to see, and so they closed the company down. So ultimately I was kind of without a job and then figuring out what to do next. And all the while, that had been probably about 4 or 5 years of working in marketing, and always kind of gravitating towards using influencers. But really kind of feeling like I was playing on the sidelines, meaning like I wasn't in the influencer industry. I was kind of like, I would try and engage with it whenever I could. And so here I was like having no alternatives really, or at least not having a job and figuring out what I wanted to do. At that point, I definitely knew I wanted to work with influencers in some capacity. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew I wanted to like be all in on the influencer space. And then the reason I started working with the talent, there's actually a few reasons, like a few just kind of basic fundamentals that led me towards working with creators directly. First was, I think the way brands work with influencers is subject to change. I thought that then, and I think it today. But what I don't think will change is the idea that people with influence will always be important and always be valuable. And so to work with them and to help them create more value is interesting to me, because I think that's a sustainable thing. Secondly, like I had helped a couple of influencers out just kind of in side projects I was doing or just as a fun thing, and found that to be incredibly rewarding. But I had this sense of frustration, like I wish I could do this at bigger scale with bigger creators or different creators, and test out like, do my theories, did they work just once, or could they be scaled? And then finally, and perhaps most pertinent to you guys as well, was like how much of a pain in the ass it was to work with creators. I had been the advertiser, so I'd been the brand trying to engage creators, and had been met with just silence when I was reaching out to different creators and things like that. Often maybe they worked on their own, maybe they had some kind of management in place, but the frustration was that it was just ridiculously difficult to work with creators, and it didn't feel like it needed to be. And what really pissed me off is that the management companies or whoever is kind of responsible for helping the creator make money is the very person stopping them from making money. Yeah. Like here I am literally trying to work with these guys and pay them good money to do a cool brand deal, and I'm either just getting ghosted or just like the conversation just falling flat because they're just being difficult, and that's not cool. That's like annoying from a brand perspective, but it's also just not cool from a creator's perspective, because these guys are trusting their like business with these other people, and these other people aren't fulfilling their side. So it felt like an easy thing to do a bit better than, and that's why.
Okay, so did you have a lot of these thoughts back then? How old were you when you were
21, 22, yeah.
Straight out of being in a growth marketing startup. So what type of marketing was that? What
So
type of product was it?
It was an app. It was like a social app. The idea was based around like finding your friends that are nearby. So it was cool. It was before people were so comfortable with Find My Friends. So I think it was a bit ahead of its time, probably not executed like it needed to be. It fell for a number of reasons, but that was the kind of product. So it was like a social app, let's say.
But it's quite a bold move at 22, and this is back before, I think 5.5 years ago, there wasn't so much talk about starting your own business really young. Like the way TikTok now educates everyone to be on, like, have a side hustle or be an entrepreneur. True. I don't think it was the same environment. So was it quite scary making a decision like that? And how did you start?
It wasn't for me. It wasn't at all. But that was, I think there was no big bold decision. There was no like moment of, right, this is the plan, I'm going to do it. I had zero responsibilities. There was no downside. So I think like it's flattering, but it's inaccurate to say that it was bold, because it just straight up wasn't. It was just like a pretty logical, pretty safe step. And if it had failed, nothing would have happened. So,
did you have a place to live? Did you have like, with your parents and they were, so you didn't need to worry about rent?
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I was still in London, in like paying rent in Shepherd's Bush. I remember I had about 6 weeks worth. I had like a month and a bit. But I mean, like I'm lucky that I could just pack up and go home if it really failed, and just stay at my parents' house. So like it was like the risk was like nothing.
And then how did you take that first step then? So you're unemployed, you'd never run a business before, and you're like, I for all these reasons want to work with creators. Who was your first call?
Well, actually, I can't remember who the first call was. I know that I just emailed like anyone who I'd worked with. I just hit them up saying, hey, I'm going to do something with creators. It was before I knew what I was going to do, or with influencers, I would have said at the time. So like, if that's interesting to you, let me know, or shall I can hit you up if anything comes of it. But it was literally just like letting people know I'm going to do something with influencers. It wasn't really, I guess it was putting my hat in the ring, adding some kind of accountability, and just kind of updating my network. But there was no real thought. The first like deliberate thought I remember having is just buying the domain 16th. And coming up with the name. That was before I knew that I wanted to do a talent agency. I like the idea of like with influencers thinking about longevity and thinking about how can you help an influencer extend their 15 minutes of fame to hit their 16th. So I like that concept. So I was like, I want a domain, and then we'll figure out the rest later.
You know, I never knew that was
really?
Where the name came from. No, not once. We've worked together for like 5 years, and I've never.
There you go.
No, that's brilliant. That's actually a really great name.
It's my little secret. I mean, yeah.
Well, now it's not so secret. I've told everyone.
What about you though, Jenny? When you started, what's your version of the story?
I was at YouTube and my job was partner manager, so I helped I think it was over 2 years. It was like 500 UK channels. It was quite a few, but it was varying from like The Economist to Ben Phillips.
Oh, wow, really?
And like all these random like music channels as well. It was all these random channels to try and optimize. And then as a kind of partnerships team, we weren't supposed to work with or advise brands, but brands kept coming to us and being like, who do you know who we could work with? But YouTube as a platform is supposed to be impartial. Like they shouldn't be recommending talent based on who they know. It's like the problem of nepotism, right? That's not what you're supposed to do. So we really weren't supposed to work with people, tell brands who to work with. Sometimes we would, sometimes we wouldn't. Like it was a grey area. Normally we were supposed to direct brands to the sales team who would tell them to spend money on ads. So you had all these brands who were desperate for contacts at Google or YouTube. And I remember once I gave a talk, I was like, put your hand up if you've spoken to someone from Google. And like the whole room, like hundreds of people put their hand up. I was like, cool, put your hand down if that person was from the sales team. And like 95% of people put their hands down. Really? And so brands didn't have access to the knowledge. So I kind of got bored and stopped learning and told myself once I had a certain amount in savings, it was like 10 grand, which is still great. But I was like, once I have 10 grand, I have to hand in my notice. Because otherwise there's always a reason to stay. And then left and still had to pay rent in London. Yeah. Put £500 into a business bank account and started like training people and like training brands. So it fell into a different way.
Yeah.
But
was it like you were doing the same work but just under a different name or not?
Some of it. I mean, it was with brands rather than with creators. And then we got to design kind of more projects freelancing is exhausting though. Like that's where I'm really happy it's a company now. So I don't know if you feel the same. Like who was the first influencer who said yes? Who was the first creator?
It might have been Twice a Health. It might have been Ryan Libby. I remember like going to meet them in like near Fulham Broadway. I wouldn't be able to say which was first, but probably one of those two. But it's interesting you talk about yours, because that to me is more of a leap. That to me is more of a decision to like, I'm going to stop doing X to do Y. Whereas I suppose my point was just that like it didn't seem like a big thing. It was just like an iteration of what like my situation.
I guess if you'd freelanced before as well, whereas I hadn't freelanced. Like I remember when I left Google, someone said, "Oh, Jenny, you've got this cheery, positive disposition." I was like, I don't know what's going on underneath. But they were like, "You're one of the few people I could actually see enjoying freelancing."
Oh, really?
And I was like, maybe. You're so naive. Hated it. Like it's, a lot of it is swapping your time for money in a very exhausting way where you're not getting to run an entire campaign. You're not getting to run a whole project. You can have like an input, or you can have a moment of influence on the way it goes, or you can advise someone, or you can be executing someone else's strategy, but you never get to do both. And that's where like working with creators is probably more rewarding, because you get to sit down and have coffee with someone and you're like, right, where do you want to take your career? And then you get to see it through. Whereas when you're freelancing for big companies, you don't have that power, because you're just like a teeny cog often brought in to validate what they know already. Like you're not, you don't really get to have an impact because they're too big. The corporations are too big.
Yeah.
Whereas working with creators, it's like tiny entrepreneurs that you're getting to support or bring a vision to life.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like it feels like we're working with a group of 45 different companies who all have something in common, but are all completely unique as well. And we get to be partnered with them and help them figure out like which direction to go, and see them grow from like 17-year-olds in some cases to like being like very highly functioning adults, like really impressive human beings, or from being a new parent to being like building a family and building a house for them, and all like that's cool. You're right that like being able to be part of the journey for the long term is amazing. And like I mentioned the idea of 16th name being like predicated on this idea of longevity, but it's like a core value of the company as well. It's like long-term strategy over short-term gain is like, whether it's a project we're working on or a creator we're working with, or an initiative inside the organization, the idea of long-term thinking is really important to us. And I think it results in what you just described, which is this really cool opportunity to be around for the long term with someone, and not just go project by project.
Yeah, and so in that first Fulham Broadway coffee, I'm trying to take you back because I really, really want this. I really want to know exactly what the growth was like. That first coffee, did you feel like a salesperson? Did you, when did you sat down, what questions did you ask? How did you shape it?
Oh yeah, these are good questions. No, that's a good point actually. I never felt like a salesperson. I've never felt like a salesperson speaking to a creator, which is actually interesting to note. So thank you. But no, I would have been trying to like evoke a sense of their vision. So I might ask like for benchmarks, who do you find inspiring, or what are you trying to do with this thing? A question I would ask then and still ask today is like, why do you hit upload every day or every week? Like, it's kind of an annoying thing to do, like to upload content. It's pretty hard. I don't know if anyone's ever tried it. It's like not fun. Well, it's fun. It's not easy. So what motivates you to do it? What's been motivating you to do it for the last 2 years, or whatever it's been? Those kind of questions, because that gets at the essence of where they want to go, which gives me an idea of actually how realistic is it that I can help, or that we can help you get there. Because if it's not realistic, then there's no conversation to have. And then if we have a sense of their motivation, they're like what motivates them to do this every day, then we get an idea of, is this a long-term fit? Is this creator going to be sustainable? Or do they have a risk of having like their 15 minutes of fame and that's it? Because if I really think, especially 5 years ago when you and I were both kind of figuring out what we're up to, the industry was going through a funny time in that like it was in like its toddler phase. like it wasn't brand new anymore. It was kind of over the time where people would be like, oh, it's the wild, wild west or whatever. But like, yeah. Well, yeah, there may have been elements of that, but it was maturing a little bit, but it wasn't mature.
It was like the downfalls of MCNs. So loads of creators would sign up to MCNs a few years before that and been trapped in these contracts that were like, some of them, they were like 15 signing lifelong contracts. And you're like, this is not how it should operate. And I think creators had got to a stage 5 and a bit years ago where they were really skeptical of who they let manage them. They all wanted a manager because they knew they wanted someone to advocate for them or someone to trust or someone to strategize with. But they were really scared of contracts. I think they'd been burnt quite a lot by MCNs that hadn't actually fulfilled or delivered any value. And so it was, and then there were these big players who were in there, like the Gleams, and James Grant was signing up a lot of people, and WME, and it must have felt quite, you by yourself, must have felt quite scrappy. Emailing creators, messaging them like, come have a coffee, tell me about what you want for the future. It's kind of crazy. I don't think you understand how like delightfully crazy that is. Like,
yeah, maybe. I don't know. It never felt like that though. Like I never felt at a disadvantage, like from a size perspective or anything like that. Like it, I don't know. I definitely felt like a David versus Goliath type feel, but like I felt that in a very motivating way, not in a kind of debilitating way. And yeah, my questions would just be focused on the creator, what they want, and then trying to assess like, is it realistic that I can help them? And I think a big part of it is like figuring out when you can't, and then just like leaving the conversation, because who wants to be signed up in a partnership where you think you're going to be a shit partner and then not deliver? Like that's not interesting.
Have you said no?
Yeah.
A lot, like what percentage of the time?
I don't know what the percentage would be. I don't know what the percentage would be, but I think over time, it's probably the nature of the no has probably changed, because in a way, like being quite, I would say we're relatively specific in our position, or we're relatively decisive in our position of good influence. I think that actually weeds out a lot of people that we wouldn't be otherwise interested in, or we wouldn't be interested in otherwise. Meaning like, I mean, you'll see this, I'm sure, with like recruiting candidates. If you, depending on the message that you put out, whether it's on your recruiting page or if you're looking for clients, and depending on like the messaging you put out, that will attract or put off certain people. So I think the nature of our no has changed, where actually like the requests we get now are usually really well aligned, or you can see like why they're like, oh yeah, I think 16th would be right for me. Whereas before you would just get a lot of kind of blanket stuff, or you would get stuff who like people who maybe heard a positive story and then they would want to join, but it's just like, it's just not right. But I think, yeah, it's not actually that hard. I think it's hard to say no at all, because we have like the position or the framework of good influence. There was definitely, before we had articulated as good influence, we had like a slightly messy roster. I remember there was probably a few people that we probably ought not really have signed, and that's nothing on them. It's just like from a fit perspective. Whereas when we finally landed on this phrase that felt like just clicked, it wasn't like it was the clarity to then go and say, it's just we're going this direction, it's not right. And then also forever now, it makes it easy to say no when it's not right as well.
Have you you know the book The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck?
Yeah.
So they say in it that if you don't want to do something but you don't want to say no, you should say like, oh, I have a policy of not doing that. And you basically created your policy where you could say no without having to insult anyone. You're just like, oh, it's against our policy, which then people blame the policy, not you.
Sure, yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, but yeah, that's interesting, because I suppose like that kind of, whenever I've heard that kind of line of advice, it can kind of be in a bullshit way. So it's like you make an arbitrary limiter being the kind of the fake policy, the personal policy, whatever, which absolutely can work. But I think there's also power in having it be like a very conscious limiter. Yeah, like a very we're deliberately, like like being quite deliberate in your rules, whatever you're giving yourself, also like limits opportunity in the short term, because most creators don't work for us, which at times, as like when you're trying to grow a company, it's like, oh fuck, that's
you're like, oh, I wish.
Tough. Yeah.
You don't want to be the biggest talent management in the world.
No.
Which is where I think we were chatting about this earlier, but where a lot of, I think, agencies have fallen down, or big talent management ends up feeling like it's heading towards the MCN model is because they're trying to sign up too many people and they can't provide the level of service that person needs. So I think there was maybe like 2-3 years ago, there was a backlash with like creators wanting individuals to manage them.
Yeah.
So they wanted something that felt boutique or like it prioritized them. And I think 16th sits nicely in that gap between a Gleam, a WME, CAA, and then an individual.
Yeah, maybe.
But
maybe, yeah. No, I see what you mean actually now, yeah. I guess like that's a different game. To build like, to try and build the next kind of big talent agency, that's a different game that I'm just not interested in.
Yeah. Okay. So I just still going back, I'm going to pull you back there because I think the interesting part, like a really good part of this story is like you building it. You talk about we a lot, but back when you were that one person, how many creators did you sign up?
I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that.
So, before you had an employee?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe 5.
And then did you chat with them? And during that question where you asked, like, what do you want? Were most of the leads that were coming in inbound? Or were you proactively going out and saying, I'm going to craft a strategy with you and then I'll go after it? Or for a while, was it like, okay, I've got this roster, we're dealing with inbound stuff? Because it's a lot to learn from never having done talent management before. Like, I remember when we met, you were like, oh, I was like, did you come from a talent management? And you were like, no, I've never done this. And I was like, what? Like, you weren't an agent before. So it must be really interesting to navigate that new environment with people.
So yeah, in terms of like the early days, in fact, up until last year, I spent like almost 0 ounces of energy on like trying to acquire creators, bring creators in. Really, the initial principles was just do a really great job for the creators that you manage in front of you, and then the rest will figure itself out. And that took us, that lasted us 4 years. I mean, it lasts us really today. It's just only because we do have ambitions to grow in a deliberate way. But it really has taken us like a long way. It's just doing a really good job because, like, as you know, creators are friends with other creators. They see their friend doing really well. It's like, ooh, what's the what happened there?
Yeah. How can we get in on that?
Yeah. And so the kind of the foundational thing there, which I still talk about when I'm like onboarding new team members, is that we just the process was, let's just focus on doing a really, really good job for these people that we do have, and then the rest will figure itself out. So in the last several months, we've definitely been much more deliberate with looking for creators. But it's not like we've been around for 5 years and we have like 40, 45 creators. It's not that many. So it's not like we're signing a ton of people all the time and like it's a big effort to go out and acquire them, look for them and scout them and reach out to them and blah, 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 pitch to them. It's not really been like that, because like the framework of good influence does a lot of that sorting for us.
No, I meant less about creators, but more about brands coming to you.
Oh, okay.
Well, lots of the leads, so you discuss what someone wanted for their future.
Yeah.
And then, so say I'm a creator, you discuss what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then you sign up and become the manager. Did you just wait for brand deals to come in, or were you really proactive finding the brands they wanted? Did you help them craft a social strategy? Yeah,
I was like stupidly proactive because I had nothing else. So I had, if I'm gonna sit down and like talk vision with a creator and get them excited, then I've got to go and fucking deliver. So it was just like me with my rucksack and my laptop going around Soho or everywhere, just meeting as many people as I possibly could.
Imagining Dora the Explorer.
Something like that. Yeah, it was something like Dora the Explorer. But no, I would pride myself on like my proactivity and my outreach and going to meet people. And like, again, another on that same slide I referenced when I'm like onboarding new employees is like just building a really good network of brands and agencies. So like I put a lot of effort into that but it brings me back to the previous point, because I wanted to do right by the creators. I wanted to like be really impressive so that they had no choice but to be like, damn, this guy's actually legit, or like to impress their friend or whatever it would be. Like I would it was like a really important thing for me to be like ridiculously proactive, because I also knew what the alternative, like what the others were doing, which is fuck all.
Yeah. And I always saw this with 16th, like some of your team, like you chat to them, they've got so much hustle. Back before you could afford to go to events, they were like trying to sneak into them, because like you were like, we are going to make connections here. And I think that's something that's really cool and really startup-y that I don't think I've ever seen a talent manager do.
Yeah.
They've tried to blag events into YouTube, but like everyone tries to do that. Yeah, but it's more like the idea of but no, I think the hustle's cool.
No, me too. I love it.
Creators knowing that you'll hustle for them is really
exciting.
exciting.
Yeah. No, I'd forgotten that had happened at all. That's fun.
But now you look back on it now, and it's a complete different company. With how many staff have you got?
21, something like that. But I would do that shit today. I'd sneak into events today for sure.
Be careful if you run the event. Dani's going to sneak it. But what? Okay, so where did good influence come from?
Good influence just came from. So we started early 2017. It was like 2018. The word influencer was becoming like just a bit ugly and just like people didn't respect it. It meant like the Kardashians. It meant like whatever controversy was happening around whoever had just come out of Love Island. It meant whatever was happening with Logan Paul. It was just all bad news. And that was concerning for a few reasons. That was concerning to me at the time, just on a very simple level. It was like, well, if all the decision makers at the top of big consumer companies are reading all this negativity about the word influencer and like they're emotional beings, just like everyone, they're not going to want to spend money on influencers as much as they are. There was that. There was like, I would go home for the weekend and see my little sister, like she would watch a lot of YouTube, and just seeing like her watch these stupid videos that were just not doing anything helpful was just a bit gutting. And like, we can do better than this. So there was those two reasons. There was like the commercial, like the kind of long-term thinking on behalf of the industry thinking, and then there was the kind of more close to home, like, do I really want to be involved in like that kind of bollocks? So I think it was those two things together. It felt like the right. It felt like it matched what we were as a company already, 95%. Like it felt like there was probably 5% of fluff that we had to then cut or change to be in line with that, but it felt like already in line with like what the essence of the company, and it also opened us up to do more of what we were really enjoying. We'd found Unjaded Jade by that time, and we'd been doing work with her for several months by that point, maybe a year by that point, and I wanted to be doing more of that kind of work. And it's like Good Influence captures that perfectly. It also captures like our roots, which are like very fitness originally. So yeah, it just felt right. Just kind of fell into place.
I think it's really interesting because I think it was the right time, even for like looking at like social platform algorithms. So YouTube, the algorithm used to be about views, then became about watch time, and then there was Adpocalypse, and it became about around that same time. So it became about what's quality content and what is, now they're focusing on personalization to keep you on the platform for longer. But like, even the platform started thinking, actually, we want to monetize content that has positive impacts. Yeah. So I think it was like a really nice timing as well, because you aligned yourself with a whole industry that was like, the creator economy is so much more than Love Island influencer. Yeah. And it's quite, I think it was a very smart.
I think it was smart, but I think it was probably lucky. And is it, I don't want to get the name wrong, would it be Susan Wojcicki? Wojcicki. Yeah. I remember, I think it was around the same kind of time, maybe end of 2018, maybe 2019. I don't know if that timeline would make sense. But I do remember, it was Robert Kinsell talking about education channels being like the like education content. And I think that probably links to what you're saying. Yeah. Well done me for butchering like two of the most important.
It's okay. We can cut that out if you
want.
That's
fine. Keep it in.
Yeah, but it's just, that's fine. So what do you think makes a successful talent manager?
Man, I think you mentioned like hustle. I do think that's important. I think it's like the energy that might be underneath the hustle is like the persistence that comes with that. The also like you need to be a self-starter because you are kind of the engine, the engine underneath the creator. And creators are human beings, and they do something that's quite like emotionally draining, creating content that kind of
really hard.
Clip. Yeah, so to be able to kind of fuel them, just from on a pure energy level, and then also from a creative level, and a commercial level, and a strategic level, that's a lot of energy. So I think you need just energy, which leads to those things, leads to hustle, leads to being proactive. I think you need to be invested. I always found it useful, like knowing the references and being in the game, like being like a nerd about like the game, so that you can speak the same language as them. I do think that's important.
I think this happens a lot with creators actually. They're like, if you ask them who they want to be like or who they're, like who's your YouTube idol, which YouTube channel, if you could be like any YouTube creator or if you could be like any TikTok creator, and you don't know the person they say.
Yeah.
Like, how are they supposed
True.
to trust you?
True.
If your only point of reference is like Anton Deck, it's not really going to work.
Yeah. Great YouTubers though.
Yeah, great. So I was saying, like, traditional TV,
Totally.
gender YouTube
No,
stuff.
totally.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. And then I think just being like having a good, like I think of like our talent managers are just really good all round business people. Like they're good at selling, they're good at strategizing, they're good at managing relationships. They're commercially aware, they're creative. They're just like good business people. And I don't know if that lands, but I think that's a really important thing.
So, because there'll probably be creators watching this podcast, what 3 questions would you say they should ask a potential talent management or agent before they?
Okay, well, one that's probably not the first question, maybe one of the last questions, but probably the most important, would be asked to speak to other creators from the roster. Like, I'm so surprised when we're speaking to a creator, how often like we'll say, like, I'm sure you've spoken to like talent from other management companies you're speaking to as well, but like let us know if you want an intro to anyone, and then it's like news to them that's a thing. That's crazy to me. Like, so 100% try and speak to different creators who are with the roster.
It's like reading a review before you buy something. Like,
Just,
come on.
yeah. But it's not on them. It's not like their fault not to have thought about it, because they're figuring it out, aren't they? So, but I do think that's a really valuable one, because there's a so that's one. I'd actually also try and speak to people in the industry. In fact, this can be like 2 and 3. This is so important. So I'm not even going to think of a third one. But if you can try and speak to people in the industry, meaning like agencies like Digital Voices or people who work at brands, that's really valuable, because influencers don't realize, especially when they're at that point, they have 2 brands. One they know very well is their consumer brand, their front-facing brand. The other one is kind of hidden. They didn't realize they had it, which is like the industry-facing brand. So if people who work at Digital Voices think that so-and-so is difficult to work with, guess what?
They won't work with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So equally, if they think so-and-so is managed by someone who's difficult to work with, so that's not fair, but it's true. Like, that's how it works. And so if I was speaking to a management company, I would want to know what Jenny thinks of them, and what and what Jesse thinks of them, and because that's really important. So that's going to be my questions 2 and 3, because it's that important, is try and speak to other people in the industry. Don't just see that so and so is signed by them and I love so and so. That doesn't really mean that much.
Because so-and-so might be stuck in a 3-year contract, desperately trying to get out.
Yeah.
And we actually get messages from brands all the time, like, by the way, this agency is really difficult to work with. Do you hate working with them too?
Really?
Oh, yeah. And the same names come up all the time. Or like, let's not even bother working with that group of creators because it's run by a narcissist.
That sucks.
It happens all the time.
That sucks.
And we've even had, like the other side, creators never know, but we've negotiated brand deals through their agents. They're happy with the rate, and this happens a lot in the US. The agent was like, great, so can we just agree this via email? And we were like, no, here's the contract. They have to sign the contract. Like, we need a contract. And they're like, for this fee, it's not worth us bothering to get a lawyer to look at the contract, so no. And the creator never gets the money. The creator loses out because their own management decided they were too small to look at a legal template. Like, it's just ridiculous. And that, I wish creators knew the stuff agencies and brands know sometimes. So if anyone wants to get in touch, ask me, ask Dani. I'll put our emails and the email addresses in the description box. But like,
I would ask Jenny more than ask me, because I'm obviously heavily biased.
You're biased.
But you guys, but seriously as well, you and your team will have exposure to many more. So you actually got a way better view than us anyway, as to like who is actually legit.
Yeah, your team's really professional. I can say it. I mean, like, I agree. I think it's really hard to find good management. Full stop. I do think it's difficult whenever, but I think, that it's always good to. The worst thing we could say is, if the worst thing we can say about a management is that their talent's too expensive, it means you're probably on the right track. Because it's like, at least you know your value and you're pushing it. But and that's worth it. Like, you as a creator, you want a management that's like easy to work with, great, but will be like they're worth more. That's exactly why you get management as a creator. So
to be clear, there are lots of great management companies out there. Lots of great people in the space.
Many great.
Do your research. Be thorough.
See, the other thing I would kind of recommend doing is finding a friend who's corporate to manage you.
Okay.
Because I do think sometimes...
Who's got that kind of inkling, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, especially if you're a bigger creator, it does make sense to have one person totally dedicated to you.
Do you what if you're kind of finding a friend to hire, do you not think there's like issues with that relationship or with having to manage that relationship and that being another thing that you have to then do?
I think it becomes you make the choice and most of the time you're choosing business over the friendship. In the long run, you are paying someone for their life to be about you.
Yeah.
And that's tough, but in the end, like, you probably value that business more. So I wouldn't do it with my best friend, but I do it with someone
you're
who...
familiar with.
Yeah.
I just think like in like you've built a company, there's lots of talk about the world being full of shitty managers, as in people who aren't good at managing other people. And whereas other people are really great at like individual contributors who are good at like kind of contributing at a high level, but the same that extends beyond like the corporate world or whatever, right? Where like also, if that's true, then I would say as a creator you need to decide, are you in this to also be an employer and like manage someone? And for some people, absolutely, the answer is like a resounding yes, and other people it'd be a resounding no. It's just, I think, like in a dynamic that's very easy to overlook and is no small thing. Like to manage someone is no small thing, and have to be responsible for all the stuff that comes with that I think that's a very deliberate choice.
To become like a real creative entrepreneur, so not just someone who loves making content, but someone who employs people and runs a business.
Yeah, entrepreneur is something else, but to be a manager. Yeah. Like lots of people, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a creator, I want to be a creative entrepreneur. Do you want to be manager as well though? Yeah. It's just like a distinction to make. And maybe that's personal to me, whereas because I really, like, for example, if I'm going to manage someone, I mean, like in a team scenario, I want to be really good at it. And I want to be getting better every 6 months or every 3 months or whatever. Like so maybe it's a personal thing. Maybe that's influencing my answer here as well. But I do think that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. Choosing to be a manager, like, it's one of the reasons we experimented with it once at Digital Voices through someone I was friends with who was in a very difficult situation. Yeah. So she'd just left a big agency, a big management talent agent. And they said, you're going to lose all your brand deals if you leave. They really tried to threaten her. And I said, I'll step in and help, like, if you need it. Yeah. And it was really difficult. Yeah. And I think I was like, she was wonderful, but I think like it's so much of an effort to be someone's manager because they rely on you for everything. You have to know them really well. It takes so much time. Yeah. You have to have so much hustle that actually, like, it's a very hard job to get right. Yeah, so yeah, if you are looking at a friend doing it with you, I would have a real reality check conversation. Like, this might be our friendship for the next 2 years and then the end of it.
Maybe, yeah.
Like, that's
true.
Really hard.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of cases where it's done, where it's been perfect as well.
Yeah. I mean, I love seeing people with small teams around them. That's what I really like about this industry. Is like when people hire researchers, like Eleanor, or when Patricia Bright's got her little team as well. Like, I love that, and I'm like, really cool. Okay, yeah, that's kind of the employment you want to support with brand deals and entrepreneurs. Yeah. Well, I guess like you've spoken before about how like creators, when you work with a creator as an advertiser, you are funding this lifestyle business or this business that you might be very it might feel very disconnected from, but you're actually playing a really important role in its development. So if that's Eleanor hiring assistants and you're essentially inadvertently employing those people or whatever else it might be, it's a cool thing for the advertiser to be able to think about, and I think it's a really cool point that you make around that. Yeah. I mean, it's great to like have a wider purpose rather than just like, because influencer marketing, the number of times people like roll their eyes for you working in it or whatever, and like, oh, you're just trying to sell more stuff. And you're like, no, actually, like, there's an entire economy that globally exists because like 50 million people worldwide defined as creators. Yeah. There's an entire economy that exists because of working in this space and because of someone having the drive to create content and put themselves out there. Yeah. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it is.
So I think 2022 is going to be a really big year for Web3 and influence marketing and the way kind of ownership changes and stuff. Yeah. But do you see any big trends in either management or in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think in the industry at large, I think like the creator economy, if you like, it offers a different vision to what like the one that we've been playing in for the last 10 years. Like it offers more democratization of like creators being able to make a living. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's interesting, actually, there's real implications for that from a brand perspective. If I'm an advertiser and I can see that creators are becoming, in some ways, less reliant on my revenue That's interesting. So like it makes me think, if I'm a brand again, like how can I differentiate? How can I be a valuable partner? How can I be a useful partner beyond just the transaction versus like the other way around, which is interesting. I think like the because we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years the number of creators grow massively, that has put more power in the brand side because they have more options. So like if you say no, cool, I've got 3 others over there. Whereas as it's growing, as the capabilities of the industry are growing to allow smaller creators or more creators to make a living from what they do, that's interesting because I think it's a shift in power back to the creator a little bit, which is exciting to me. So I think that's the main thing, just as a movement, which is like more creators who are smaller, able to make a decent living from what they're doing, is really interesting. And I think that has like knock-on effects like the one I just described, but like countless more. So I think that's as a general movement, I think that's probably the core of lots of the trends that I would be seeing.
Yeah, I think gone are the days where brands are like, did you tell them we're going to pay them? Like, why did they say no? And we're like, they said no because they don't agree with the campaign. They're like, what do they mean? Like, what? I think that is really going to change. And brands, you're right, are going to have to step up to do more deeper, meaningful, consistent partnerships.
Yeah.
And even things like partnering on Discord servers, which I think are going to become far more normal as ways for creators to interact with their audience. Like that community-based relationship. How do brands play in that space? Because you have to reward the audience rather than, it's not about getting an ad spot in a video. It's about like, how do you engage more deeply?
To the community?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's just the essence of good influencer marketing as well, though. Because like it feels different now because community is kind of heightened right now because of things like Discord or just the kind of the zeitgeist of the industry. Like community is like more of a thing now, but community marketing is kind of influencer marketing, I think. Like to me, a community has like a leader, and that leader is an influencer. So like Jade has her community, she leads that community. The brand then pays Jade for access to the community. Whether or not they do a good job of what they do with that access is that's like the decision of like the creator, their management, the agency, the brand. And so that's why like if something goes wrong at one or more of those links, you have bad / probably most influencer marketing. Whereas if the brand respects the community, then I think that feeds through that connection. And I think if one of those parties don't respect the community, if the influencer doesn't, then and that's what you'll see from like lots of people who come to fame very quickly without like having to have grafted to build the audience. They didn't really build a community. They've got an audience, but they didn't really build a community, which is like why I think you see a lot of it fall short. Yeah.
I like this idea. Maybe we'll stop talking about authenticity finally and start talking about community,
nice.
Which would be really nice because I think authenticity has been done for the last 5 years. It's like,
I don't know what that means anymore.
No one knows. It means, can I sell things without feeling like I'm selling things?
Got ya.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We're going to go on to quickfire questions. Cool. Okay, quickfire questions.
Cool.
If you could be any animal, what animal would you be?
A lion.
Favourite film?
Collateral.
Favourite TikTok trend?
I don't watch TikTok.
You don't want to?
Not really, no.
Really?
No.
Wow. Favourite YouTube creator?
Matisse Thybulle, NBA player.
Really? I didn't realise you were into basketball.
Yeah, big time.
Okay, cool. Because you're tall.
That's why.
Favourite advert?
I liked the out-of-home ads a few years ago when the New Balance 990, I think V5 came back out. And I can't even remember what the copy was now, but it was just like worn by supermodels and a dad in San Diego or something like that. They were really cool.
I love that one. That was actually really good.
Yeah, they're good.
Good out-of-home campaign, like it. Favourite food?
Right now, my favourite food is bao buns.
Favourite drink?
Fizzy elderflower.
Favourite brand?
Arket.
Last YouTube video you watched?
Boring one. It would have just been NBA highlights or like an ESPN clip or something like that. That's pretty lame.
Not lame. Last time you cried?
It would have been in the last 6 months. Maybe like autumn or winter. I can't remember.
What, just in dark times?
Yeah, probably.
And what did you want to be when you grew up?
A rock star.
Okay. That, I think, is it.
Cool.
Good, perfect. Threw you in it, that one. That was good. So thank you so much for coming on and thank you for listening. If you're a creator and are looking for a management opportunity or just have a chat, get in touch with 16th.co. And if you want to chat about anything linked to influencer marketing or as a creator want some help with your strategy, which Digital Voices does for free, check out our website, digitalvoices.com. Thank you.
Thank you.